Okay. Welcome in, welcome in. And there's a moment in this game, in this match, where you can just feel the Emirates crowd just, you know, edging at their feet. And it was the moment when we had the corner, and it was the first corner in this game. And there was an air of predictability. Chelsea had a lot of the moments, but Arsenal had the game. Welcome back to Guna Pavilion, and this is our Arsenal versus Chelsea post-game reaction. Arsenal 1-2 against Chelsea's 1. And if you're new here, I'd like to say I appreciate you. Thank you for finding us. But if you've been rocking with us, you know how we do this. Like I say, I do appreciate all of you and thank you for always being here. And this channel is a little bit different. We could take the path of ranting and raving and all of that, but we tend to look at Arsenal a little bit more reflective, look at the game, see what we learned, and see how we can just push this thing forward. So we're going to go into this game. I'm going to look at a couple of things. So let's just start, with this, right? This game really can be summed up, right? If you look at this closely, um, and there's a lot about Arsenal in this game that felt a little bit um, professional, and it's hard when you're watching the game at a time, at home, because you got the fan nerves and everything like that. But look, on paper, Chelsea had 60% possession in this game, and that would suggest that there was control. But Arsenal controlled the moment, and Chelsea circulated the ball. Arsenal allowed them to have the balls in areas where we thought there would be no threat, and that's why the game never felt like it was slipping away. And now I know we're going to talk about, towards the end of the game when it felt more chaotic, and this is what Chelsea have always wanted to do when they play Arsenal, let the game descend into a little bit chaos, and Arsenal got sucked into it, and we'll talk about that. Um, but let's just look at this a little bit here. If you look at the spacing between the lines, Eze stepping just high enough, um, you know, to screen, and Gyökeres providing that pivot. There's a lot of good things that the structure of Arsenal allowed us to do. Now, Chelsea completed 400 passes. That is a lot. But the question that you're going to have to ask is how many of those passes really disrupted Arsenal's shape? And that's the question. It wasn't as if, Chelsea was slicing through Arsenal. They circulated the ball in lots of areas where there was no threat to Arsenal. And you can see, from up to and the stats, how many times they actually got into Arsenal's box with their passing. There were a couple of times, remember the Cole Palmer shot from Pedro Neto, where Arsenal allowed them to just, get the ball and so much space. But other than that, Arsenal's structure largely, kept them intact. Now, okay, let's go into our three ups, guys. So the first thing for me is just set piece. Come on, we got to talk about our set piece dominance. And listen, we've got to own it, right? Set piece is a critical part, of what we do and what we do very, very well. So every time Arsenal gets a set piece, you're thinking, okay, can we make the most of it? Arsenal really only had 5 set corners in this game. Chelsea had double the amount. But it's not about how many corners you have, is what you do with it. And if Arsenal scored with, nearly half of the corners that it had, then that's the efficiency that I really, really want. And it's not random, it's preparation. The stats are showing that Arsenal scored, 16 goals, which is the joint top in the league. And actually, this is a record that Arsenal held a while ago. So it's really, really good to see that. And look, this freeze frame, about that first goal just tells you everything that you want to know about what Arsenal does when it comes to corners. The blocks, the timed runs, the late movement into the box, the delivery paced with purpose. Of course, the delivery has to be on point. But in games like this, where open plays chances are very limited, then this detail becomes decisive. And I'm glad that Arsenal have had enough practice throughout the season. While everybody was trying to shame Arsenal to move away from it, Arsenal just kept persisting. And this might be what drives us to the title. Honestly, I think our ability to have, clarity in this moment, a lot of times corners and set pieces have been the first goal for Arsenal to just unlock things, and long may that continue. Second thing for me is midfield composure. Yes, it didn't feel like that in the game, but when you actually, watch the game again, you will see that Arsenal didn't give up a lot in the midfield. Um, most of the time in the game, let's put it that way. While Chelsea's midfielders were active, plenty of touches, plenty of movement, Arsenal didn't really lose their shape in response. You can see that in the average position, of the Arsenal players. They didn't necessarily drop deeper. They held their distances between each other, and Rice's influence was subtle but important. Actually, an argument to say that Rice for a couple of minutes in that game was probably match. Now I know that Raya is going to get the headlines, and Gabriel probably got the man of the match, but actually Rice ran himself into the ground. I think he physically could not give anymore, and hence was beginning to make this sort of mental mistakes. And of course, we're going to talk about Mikel Arteta protecting the players a little bit more. But I thought that Rice's influence was really, really good. He really dominated a lot of things. Maybe not the highlight reel, some of the flashy stuff, but he just managed the spaces between the highlights. And that's really important for the system that we have in terms of players recognizing the spaces between each other and managing those spaces very well. Sometimes control isn't about what you create, right? It's about what you prevent. And I thought Rice, did that very well. So happy Norgard came in, because honestly, I think he should be playing a lot more games as well. So glad to see Mikel Arteta do make that change and bring Norgard in, because hey, you're running out of games in the Premier League, and like I said, he's only played 35 minutes in the Premier League. That's just ridiculous. So okay, let's look at the right side relationship. And I thought, for me, that was a definite up for Arsenal. Now you can see the triangle that are forming in that right half space. Rice drifting slightly right, Eze receiving between the lines, and Saka pinning the fullback. I thought Saka had a good game against Hato. A lot of times he beat him, whether he was going out on the outside or coming into the inside. And I think he came into the inside a lot more. And I think that's study, that's understanding the players that you're playing against. I think if he was playing against Cucurella, it would have been a slightly different thing, because Cucurella wouldn't have allowed him to come inside. But Hato probably didn't realize how good Saka was, because Saka was beating him a couple of times, when he did that. And see, Eze receiving the balls between the lines was also really important. He was really pushed up there. And listen, these are games that you kind of, I look at the way that Eze plays, and I kind of think of Arsenal players, all tied in a string. And when you pull one, everyone gets pulled together. And when we don't get it quite in that base of the midfield, in terms of who's the one bringing the ball out of the midfield, who's passing into the forward areas, who's making the connection, you probably don't see the best, of Eze. But I tell you, he still got into the right positions. He still, when he touched the ball, he was still efficient with it. And you can see by his numbers, as well. Timber was stepping in when the space opened, and honestly, as much as I appreciate Timber. Obviously, he scored that goal that actually ultimately allowed Arsenal to win. I just feel like more creative players should be running into that space, other than Timber, and I think that's something that we're probably gonna have to sort out in the summer, because I would want my fullbacks to do fullback things, get up into the middle, join up with a play, but I don't want them in the final third. And honestly, I'm sure if I look at the stats, Timber's probably in the final third more than most fullbacks actually in the country. And that's something that I would want a more proficient player in that space in that particular part of the pitch as well, because they can actually do things better than that. Because he had a couple of chances, but of course he's not a striker. He's not an attacking midfielder. So he can only do the best that he can. But I just wish it was an attacking player getting into those moments. Um, Now, look, Eze, that big chance didn't feel improvised. If you think about the chance that he had, it was him walking the ball. And I feel like an Eze apologist, at this point, because every time, I'm always having to come and say to people, hey, just don't just hold your biases against him. Look at what he's doing on the pitch. And people will be saying, oh, he's disappeared, he's that. And listen, I think it is what it is. That shot that he had came from coordinated movement and spacing that was practice. And there's a reason why Mikel Arteta kept him on the pitch, because I think that there were still some good things that could have come out of Eze in this game. But hey, listen, at this time of the season, it doesn't really matter how we do it. It's just the important thing that we do it. Okay. In this show, we always talk about, what Arsenal did well, what we can improve. Um, I think the first down, for me, there were quite a lot of transitional exposure that Arsenal had in this game. Sometimes when both fullbacks were pushed high, the pitch felt a little bit stretched. Most of the game, the rest defense, held firm. Um, and it didn't cost Arsenal tonight, because I think Chelsea had a much different plan. But I think that if we're going to be playing the game with Brighton, we're going to have to be careful about those transitions, because trust me, Brighton are going to come with the pace. They're going to come with wanting to take advantage of transition from Arsenal. And I dare say they have, players that can put the ball in the back of the net. So I think we definitely have to be careful when we're playing Brighton, who's also playing away from home. That's going to be a tough game. No question about that. Second down, obviously open play, sharpness. Listen, we had 12 shots, 5 on target, only 2 big chances created. And a significant portion of that threat came from set pieces. So, listen, there were moments in open play where the final play pass just lacked conviction. This wasn't a flowing attacking performance. It was far from it. It was efficient, which is fine. But there's always room for sharper execution in the final third. Final down for me is just the momentum. We talked about this in the last 3 games that we had, and it's sustaining momentum. And I get it, there's a combination that allows Arsenal to be able to sustain this momentum, and it's all about the freshness of the players. And so that's why I would love to see some changes against Brighton. I think this squad is capable of absorbing those changes. I think a lot of players have played way too many minutes. And I think that when it gets into really, really chaotic games where there's so much happening in those games, I want to see some players, be fresh as much as possible to go into the 19, because I think that it's really going to turn up as we get closer to playing Man City. But yeah, you can see from this momentum again, a lot of things just died down. Even with 10 men, Chelsea pushed late, and you could almost feel the crowd being tense. We saw it out, obviously, the structure didn't collapse, but it didn't feel serene, right? We always do want to, put this game out of reach for the opposition so we can just relax into the final 15 minutes, because boy, do we need that, as Arsenal fans. But I think this is the path that we're going to take. If we want to win this league, we're going to have to suffer. We're going to have to suffer together with the players, and hope that we can get it to a point where City are no longer breathing down our necks. But, zooming out, guys, when we started talking about this road to 90, and to be honest, it might not be 90s anymore. Like I said, 9 games left. We're 5 points clear again. City still to come. And this game in our framework was in that emotional bucket. Fixtures that test your mentality. It's an emotional high and emotional down, as well after the game, and you're really up for this game. And it does make the next game even more challenging. So Spurs and Chelsea, London derbies, two responses in a row. And from here until the Etihad, the objective is straightforward. We match the results, remove volatility, and keep that table secure. So when Manchester City win, we win. If they draw, we do not lose. That's just as simple as that. And if they draw, we take the advantage, of winning the game. Now, people are sort of looking at Mikel Arteta and saying, well, he was asked a question around whether it matters whether City play ahead. And I think by the evidence that what we've seen so far is that when City actually plays ahead, Arsenal responds. Arsenal know exactly what they need to do and their mindset focus. So maybe in a roundabout way, that might actually help Arsenal that City are playing ahead, because we go into the game not knowing exactly what we want to do, rather than maybe Arsenal playing ahead and maybe just thinking that they've just got a little bit of a cushion here and there and they're not completely focused. So I'm glad that both Man City and Arsenal are playing at the same time in the weekend, and I think the next time that we play, Arsenal might be playing before City. I think so. But listen, after this, we've got to think about game at a time. I know we've got a couple of games. I think there's 3 games now before we actually meet City in the Carling Cup. So that's really, really important. But then, after that, it's all about getting to the Etihad. And after City, the running for Arsenal is Newcastle, is Fulham, is West Ham, Burnley, Crystal Palace, and 3 of those at home. So, like I said, we adjusted our expectations. 90 points will not be required anymore, I don't think. I think late 80s will be enough. What matters now is us being steady, and tonight, felt steady completely. When the whistle went, guys, it just felt there was a huge sigh of relief. One, because it's Chelsea, but I think it's also a sign that Arsenal know how to respond, to this kind of games. Um, Brighton is next, and that carries immediate focus for Arsenal. And we've got to be professional. One more step at a time, if we need to get to where we need to go. So, guys, listen, that was our Arsenal Chelsea post game breakdown. If you enjoyed this preview, go back and watch the Spurs reaction if you haven't already. Very different emotional temperature, very different tactical story in there. And of course, we've got the Brighton preview that's coming up next. So let me know how this one felt for you guys in the comment section. 9 to go, we move. I'll see you in the next one.